Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of the effort by Senators Stabenow and Peters to amend S. 2012 for a federal response to the ongoing crisis in Flint, Michigan. We know about the lead in the water supply, the fact that it was known, the fact that many children today have suffered the consequences. It is incumbent that the federal government be a partner in finding a way to correct that circumstance as soon as possible. So I come to the floor urging our colleagues to find a way that we can move forward with such an amendment to help the families in Flint, Michigan. And I congratulate my colleagues, Senator Stabenow and Peters, for the leadership. But I hope we don't lose sight of the big picture, and that is happening in cities and towns all across America. In Michigan, it's not only Flint, but parts of Grand Rapids, Jackson, Detroit, Saginaw, Muskegon, Holland, and several other cities have seen high school lead levels in their children. Sebring, Ohio, just this week closed schools for 3 days because of lead in their tap water. In Toledo, officials have long treated the water with phosphates to prevent leaching of lead. 11 cities and 2 counties in New Jersey have higher percentages of children with elevated lead levels than Flint, Michigan. State lawmakers and advocacy groups said Monday of this week. And here in the nation's capital, in Washington, D.C., in the early part of the last decade, lead leached into the water of possibly 42,000 children. So let me talk 1 minute about my state of Maryland. In the city of Baltimore, high lead levels in school prompted officials to turn off drinking fountains and pass out bottled water instead in every school in Baltimore City. They're not hooked up to the fountains because it's not safe. And across the state of Maryland, every 1 or 2-year-old in the entire state will be tested for lead. That is 175,000 children because they're at risk. So this is a national problem. Flint, Michigan, remedial cost alone is estimated to cost about $800 million. That's about 2/3 of what we currently appropriate every year for drinking water infrastructure in the entire country. The amount we appropriate is woefully inadequate. According to the EPA's most recent estimates, more than $655 billion may have been needed to repair and replace drinking water and wastewater infrastructure nationwide over the next 20 years. This comes out to over $32 billion per year, every year, for the next 20 years. Yet currently we spend approximately $3 billion per year at the federal level on combined drinking water and wastewater infrastructure state revolving funds, 1/10 of the total amount that's needed in order to modernize our infrastructure. Mr. President, the public expects when they turn on the tap that the water is safe. They expect that when they use their bathroom facilities, that the wastewater is being treated appropriately. They expect that a nation, the United States, can deliver water in a manner that's efficient and safe. In reality, our water infrastructure out of sight and is woefully inadequate, as we've seen in Flint, Michigan. So I asked my colleagues, if it costs $800 million to fix the pipes in Flint, Michigan, are we going to come to an agreement that we need a substantial increase in the amount of funds appropriated for the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds to help all American cities? Because the stake could not be higher. There are so many things that went wrong in Flint, Michigan. First and most directly, the failure of the governor and his appointed emergency managers to identify and address the problem as it grew more and more apparent. They knew the problem, and yet they didn't do anything about it. Second, a declining and increasingly impoverished population, which has been gutted the tax base and eliminated the ability to pay back the loans that the city might receive from the federal government to change out their pipes. It's also a matter of ability to actually afford the infrastructure at the local level. That's why the state partnership through the federal partnership through the state revolving funds is so critically important. And Mr. President, this has never been a partisan issue. I've served on the Environment and Public Works Committee since I was elected to the Senate, and we've recommended authorization levels and changes in the formula so that we can modernize our water infrastructure in this country, and it's had near unanimous support in our committee. And as I said, there's not nearly enough money in these revolving loan funds to keep up to date the drinking and wastewater infrastructure in this country, even if the cities could pay back the loans. The list goes on, but this list is not limited to Flint. These demographic and fiscal characteristics are similar to many, many cities of every size in the United States, in almost every state. But none of these things that have gone wrong in Flint are more distressing than the possibility that children may have suffered irreversible damage in their developing brains from the exposure to lead. Exposure to even a low amount of lead can be profoundly affect a child's behavior, growth rates, and perhaps most worrisome, their intelligence over time. Higher levels of lead in child's blood can lead to severe learning disabilities and hand-eye coordination, and even the prospect towards violence. Younger children and fetuses are especially vulnerable to even small exposures to lead, whether it be in tap water, lead paint, lead in the soil still left off from the days when we had leaded gasoline, lead in children's toys and jewelry, and the list goes on and on and on. So there's not just one source of lead, I understand that. But they do expect that when we turn on the faucet, you're not going to be getting water that contains lead. Further, it is impossible to gauge how a specific child will be affected because of the developmental impacts of lead poisoning can take years to become apparent. So you might have been poisoned 5 years ago, and the effects will take long before you see it in the classroom or see it in the community. In fact, the health effects are so severe over our nation's health experts have declared that there is no safe level of lead in a child's blood, period, the end, zero. I also want to highlight a quote from an article in the New York Times on January 29th of this year. Email released by Office of Governor Rick Snyder of Michigan last week referred to a resident who said she was told by a state nurse in January 2015 regarding her son's elevated blood lead level. It's just a few IQ points. It's not the end of the world. Mr. President, there's got to be a greater sense of urgency in this country. You know, we know that every child should have the opportunity in this country. If they work hard, we shouldn't take away that opportunity by diminishing their ability to achieve their objectives. Dr. Hannah Hatasha, the doctor primarily responsible for bringing this issue in Flint to light, and others have studied lead poisoning, have sharply different views of lead exposure for which there is no cure. If we're going to put, and this is a quote that she said, if we are going to put something in a population and keep down for generations to come, it would be lead. This is devastating to the individual and devastating to our country's potential. The work of the institutions in the state of Maryland to combat lead exposure is exemplary. Baltimore's Coalition to End Childhood Lead Poisoning is a nonprofit organization dedicated to services and advocacy on behalf of families affected by lead poisoning. This organization started as a grassroots effort by Maryland parents who saw a problem in their community and who sought innovative solutions. The coalition has grown nationally, founding the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative to provide a holistic approach for safer and greener living space for American families. The coalition has dozens of local partners, including the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the University of Maryland School of Law. Together, I'm proud to say that these Maryland institutions are paving the way to combat lead poisoning and researching innovative solutions to the tragic problem. But we cannot rely on nonprofits to fix this problem for us. The stakes are too high and the solution too costly. We have a duty to these children to make sure their drinking water is safe. And make no mistake, massive lead poisoning of an entire city's children from a source robs our country of the entire generation of great minds, which are a core to the future of these most vulnerable communities. So, Mr. President, I just urge my colleagues in the Senate not only to act responsibly in regards to Flint, Michigan, and we can do that today on the bill that's before the floor, but to recommit ourselves to find a path forward to provide safe drinking water, not just for one city, but for all American cities and for all people of this nation.